Hi, I'm Robbin Miller. I am host of Miller Chat. Today, I am hosting a program with Sanam Zaer and Bridgette Hylton. They're both Shrewsbury residents. And today's topic is Baking for a Better Shrewsbury. Welcome, Sanam and Bridgette. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank
So
you.
tell us who you are in terms of being a resident of Shrewsbury. Tell a little bit about yourself.
Okay, my name is Bridgette Hylton. I'm a Shrewsbury resident. I actually grew up here and attended the public schools. I'm an attorney by trade and I work in Worcester County.
And I am Sanam Zaer. I grew up next door in Grafton, but I've lived in Shrewsbury about 5 or 6 years. I am professionally a teacher and currently an administrator of a local private school.
Oh, welcome, welcome. Okay, so we're talking about social justice. What particularly are we going to talk about social justice today? I think we wanted to focus on racism and social justice issues.
Yeah, that's fine. So we were thinking we would share how to make these extra delicious brownies that are a mixture of our social justice work, and talk kind of a little bit about some of the stuff that we have going on in town, if that's good with you.
What are you baking today for the show?
So today we're going to be making brownies, and the way that I make them is with a box. But since I've met Bridgette, I no longer need boxed brownies because her brownies are the best I've ever had.
I'm going to show you.
Okay.
I'm going to show you a couple of tricks today on how to make your brownies extra fudgy and ooey gooey, which is the way that both of us like them. Also with a little extra salt. So this is more of a grown-up type of brownie using dark chocolate and cacao and extra salt and extra fudgy gooey. So that's the plan for today for what we're making.
Talk about the relationship between the both of you. How did you guys become friends?
So it's actually funny that the topic is racism because we met in a post on Facebook about racism. This was about maybe 4 years ago. I had written a post just asking members of the community, you know, we need to talk about these issues more. How are we addressing these issues in our homes and in our community? And I received a lot of backlash on that post, a lot. Like there were hundreds and hundreds of comments and people were very upset that I was bringing this issue up. And then in that post comes Bridgette. And then we started speaking in a private message and it just, our friendship blossomed from there.
I think we saw that we had similar values around issues of social justice, and that became sort of the connection that allowed us to bond. And then we realized we were about the same age. We both had kids around the same age. We both lived here in town. We both grew up in the area. We both were interested in writing. We both, you know, we have just a ton in common.
We both also love dark chocolate.
And we love dark chocolate.
Yes.
So that helped. So I think right now I'll do the first step in making these fudgy brownies, if that's okay. All right. So the very first thing you're going to need is a half cup of melted butter. This is what's going to give the top of the brownies like a nice crunch, even though the inside is going to be super duper fudgy. So I'm just putting that in my mixer. And I'm going to add 1 1/8 cups of white sugar. I actually like to use regular white sugar because it makes a little bit of a crisp to the brownie, versus if you use a super fine sugar, it does make it fudgier, but I like the little bite that the sugar gives it. So I'm actually going to put these in the mixer with a tablespoon of oil, and I'm going to cream them together.
And while she does that, I'm going to go ahead and take a chocolate chip from this bowl over here just to help.
So this is going to take about 3 minutes. So
that's funny. Well, I'm sure that those chips are probably very good and very sweet. So tell us, what are some of the diversity equity issues in Shrewsbury that you feel are important to talk about today?
I think the number one issue is the lack of representation in our local government and administrations in our schools. That is an interesting topic because we now live in a majority minority district, and the majority of that is South Asian, but we have very few people in public office or in the administration of our schools that reflect the diversity that exists within our community. So that's something that we think would be important, among many other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, going off of how we met, I think our community's come a long way in terms of having these conversations, because I had mentioned this post that we were in where so many people didn't know how to have these conversations and they were upset that we were even bringing it up. And now you're seeing people really dive into these conversations more. So that's been really great, but we still have a lot of work to do in terms of having open and honest conversations about these topics. The same way that we would discuss, you know, team sports or what brand snow pants to buy in the summer, we need to also be able to comfortably discuss racism and how we can resolve that locally, and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I think the unfortunate truth is the passing of George Floyd really kind of put a spotlight on these issues as they exist in America, and not just in the cities, but also in suburbs like ours. So it's an important opportunity for people in Shrewsbury to not let this moment pass without seeking more justice within our local community.
And you're both very passionate about it.
We are, yeah. Over the pandemic, we started this group called A Better Shrewsbury, which is what this baking show is named after. It started as just a small group of us kind of discussing these issues, but now it's grown to about 450 people. And we're having active conversations every day. People post learning materials, they post local topics, and we all just discuss them. So that's been a really great micro community within Shrewsbury that we've both been really happy to be a part of.
The next step for the brownies is going to be to sift together the dry ingredients that we're going to include. So the trick to making super duper fudgy brownies is using part bread flour. So what I do, instead of using a half cup of all-purpose flour, I actually use 1/4 cup of bread flour and 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour. And then to make them extra chocolatey, I use a 1/4 cup of Hershey's cocoa or any brand cocoa powder and 1/4 cup of cacao. And to that, I add a half teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. And
why do you sift it?
I sift it together because that opens up space in between the flour and it allows the finished product to have a nicer consistency. So this is a trick I use for the chocolate chip cookies that you love and some of the other things that I make. And it helps it also to mix everything together, which is great.
Is this a family?
Stay away from baking multi-step things because of all the dishes it creates.
Is this a family recipe, Bridget?
I'm sorry?
Is this a family recipe?
It's not a family recipe. I always am trying different brownie recipes, and if I'm not happy with them, I modify them. So I actually found a recipe for like add the bread flour, add this, and then I just slowly changed out things until I got a recipe that I liked. So that's generally how I like modify recipes to make them saltier, fudgier, and more chocolatey.
And my contribution is that every time I travel, I find cacao and I bring it back from corners of the world so that she can turn it into brownies.
That is awesome. How many calories?
Calories?
A lot.
Yeah, you know how we have labels on the brownies?
Relatively speaking, this is actually a lower calorie brownie recipe because it doesn't have a ton of flour. It does have a good amount of sugar though.
Uh-huh. Cool. You know, actually baking is like in the old days when people used to knit together or make blankets together, when they talked about all different topics, you know, anywhere from the best buy in town to the best furniture to the local presidential campaign or the state campaign. So while we're baking, can you want to say a little bit more about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What do we need to do to improve? How do you improve a climate that's so deeply entrenched for so many years?
I mean, it's not a problem that's going to fix itself overnight. And I think sometimes we're looking for really quick solutions. We say, okay, we need diversity. What can we do now? But that's just not how it's going to happen. You know, we can, like, for example, in town, we've been making efforts to diversify the candidate pool for the principals, but we're coming up short and we're consistently being provided with only white candidates. And the reason for that, I think, is because you really need to have long-term solutions in place for that, and you need to think outside the box. Because if you look at the entire United States candidate pool for leaders in schools, for example, that's a almost 80% white candidate pool. So the candidate pool itself is partially the problem. So if you're drawing from that pool and not outside of that pool, you're not going to be able to create diversity. So one thing I think we need to do is kind of think longer term, put in longer term solutions. How can we put more people on the path to leadership positions? How can we provide more opportunity? How can we make these positions more appealing? How can we think outside the box? And I think that extends outside the schools as well. We need to kind of think outside the box instead of in the box. Sometimes we try really hard to diversify the box when the box itself is the problem. We need to really remove this box and figure out, what do we want this space to look like?
And I think that's why the strategic plan that the town is working on now is an excellent opportunity for some of these issues to have long-term goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to make sure that that's a part of the future of Shrewsbury. So we really commend the town for the work on the strategic plan, and we're hopeful that it's going to be not just a piece of paper, but an important part of what the future of our town looks like.
A working document,
That's right.
right? As they say.
Yep.
So while we're talking, how's it going with the brownies? What's next?
It's going great. So I've creamed together the butter and sugar now. So I'm going to actually add to that 1 tablespoon of vanilla. And I really recommend using the highest quality vanilla that you can find because it absolutely makes a difference. So a lot of people don't know that for chocolate to really taste good, it needs a counter flavor, and vanilla actually usually provides that for brownies. In addition to that, I'm going to go ahead and add 2 large eggs.
Oh, this is something I can help with.
Yeah.
I will crack an egg for you.
Thank you.
I got eggshells in it. I'm so sorry.
Right, I got it out. No problem. And I'm going to add this now to the mixer. And I'm going to go ahead and let this mix for another 3 minutes or so. I'm going to turn it up a little bit until it's lighter in color. When you cream together butter and sugar, it's pretty much cream, but it turns white. So I'm going to turn this up a little bit and let it lighten up.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be delicious. Delicious brownies. And while we're talking on the topic, here we are talking about the school, trying to fix the box, so to speak. What about in terms of outside of the school, like employees in the town? How do you feel about that?
In terms of the other departments in town outside of the schools, it's just as important to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. We had a conversation early on with Chief Anderson, who's the new chief of police here in town, about how we could go about adding some diversity and equity to the police board. And one of the topics that came up was a civil services exam. That's a tongue twister.
That is, yeah.
Civil service exam, and how that might be a barrier to increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion on the police force here in town. It's a similar conversation that we could have with pretty much any department in town, including the Board of Selectmen itself and the school committee. It's important for us that candidates of all different backgrounds have a chance to consider running for office or to be elected to one of these positions. Right now, the pipeline seems to exist between friends telling their friends to run. And the problem with that is that historically, a lot of these boards and appointed positions as well in town have not been given to people, or have not been people of color elected to them or appointed to them. And so moving beyond that is going to require building into diverse communities and promoting things like running for office and how do you do it and what are the steps here in Shrewsbury. And I think that's an important way that we can get more people to run for office. Something that we've done in A Better Shrewsbury, actually, and we have a lot of members in A Better Shrewsbury who are now running for town meeting, running for the library board of trustees, running for school committee, because we are constantly doing not just voter education, but election education. And that's an important part about getting new people to get interested in running for office.
And adding to this, I've had at least 6 people reach out to me to ask me, how can I vote? And I was a little bit surprised to hear that. But there's a lot of new citizens in town. There's people who have never voted before. If we can increase voter registration drives. We're actually working on a voter registration drive now to try to get more voters registered to vote. But you know, a lot of people don't have that information because they don't pay attention to these things. At the state level, you know, in our town, we have a lot of non-citizens that have their children in the schools and they're paying taxes, they own properties, and they're not able to vote in municipal elections. At the state level, we need to change that because these are tax-paying residents of our town and they're not able to contribute their voice to the decisions of our town. These are different systematic things that need to change here.
Those are great ideas. And while we're talking, anything else we have to do for the brownies?
So the next step, I've already preheated the oven to 350 degrees, and I'm gonna take a 9x13 baking pan. I'm just gonna put a tiny bit of cooking oil in it. I like to use the coconut one. It's actually not even gonna touch the brownies, but it's just to keep the parchment paper in place. Because I like to bake using parchment paper. It's just easier to clean up and the food doesn't stick, and it's just like a nice way to go about prepping. So I just grab a big one and use that. Yes, indeed, you got all my tricks. So do not, you know.
She holds her recipes close to her heart. So
This is very lucky, right? This is a lucky day.
This is a new moment in our relationship.
So the next step is going to be taking the egg and butter and vanilla and sugar mixture, and I'm just going to very gently fold in the dry ingredients. And you have to do it very gently because if you beat it too much or you mix it too much, it's going to change the texture of the brownies to more fluffy and airy like cake. And we want dense, fudgy, chocolatey brownies. So we're going to just very lightly mix in the dry ingredients.
So going back to your previous question about things we can do in town and the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, one thing I realized recently is that the election itself is scheduled on Eid, which is a very important holiday for our Muslim community. And the only reason I know that is because I have a lot of friends that are Muslim. But if you don't have that kind of representation in the offices that are making these decisions, you have kind of oversights like this where you're, for example, placing an election on a major holiday for another religion. So these things are just really important. Like even if you don't have diversity, if you have diversity connected to people working in the office or diversity within that network somehow, then you're bringing a lot of valuable information in the town to just become a more inclusive community.
And I think something along those lines is the removal of Columbus Day from the town and school calendar, which is something that A Better Shrewsbury has been soliciting the town and the school committee to do. And the reason why we feel compelled to do that is because there's not a strong Indigenous community in Shrewsbury that is able to speak up on these issues. We wish that there was, so that they could take the lead on it. And so we've asked them, what is your opinion about this Columbus Day thing? We've reached out to different Native communities to ask them for feedback on that, and also on the wayfinder signs that were being put up in town. And so that's where the lack of diversity can kind of prevent us from being our best community, because people don't realize that things like having Columbus Day on the calendar are detrimentally impacting real people, because they're only talking to people like them. So they don't realize that this is something that's not just annoying, but actually greatly offensive to Native peoples.
Yeah, it's so deeply entrenched, you know. It's very political, very complicated. In terms of
diversity, when you have diversity sitting all at the same table, these issues come up. They just come up naturally. When you have these relationships with your coworkers, when you have these relationships outside of the office, these are things that just come up day to day. Like even Bridgette and I we're obviously two different races. We have two different experiences, and we learn from each other constantly. She shares her experiences, I share mine, and we learn from each other, not because of any academic exercise, but just because we genuinely care about each other and we're in each other's social networks, and we just simply have broadened our our viewpoint in life just by proximity to each other. So bringing that into our local government, into our schools, it adds incredible value to the type of government and education that we're providing for our town.
And I think that at the point that the town begins to see diversity as an asset, as an opportunity, instead of as an obligation or as a burden, I think that we'll all be better off and we'll feel like it's a more inclusive community, because I think Shrewsbury wants to be an inclusive community. It seems like that's something that people love to say about our town. So in order to do that, we have to see diversity as a benefit to us.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. And what else? So what's the next thing with the brownies?
Okay, so now I'm actually just gonna spread the brownie batter into this parchment paper in my pan.
And I'm just gonna go ahead and taste the brownie batter
To
to make
Exactly
sure
right.
that it's exactly correct.
Do you guys feel we should have a DEI committee? And what purpose will it serve?
Yeah, Sanam was instrumental in recommending that the town actually have a DEI committee. That committee has served its purpose now, but it's something that in future, maybe we do need to consider having an appointed DEI chair. I'm gonna hand this off to my 10-year-old son.
Oh, hand it off to me. That was the biggest disappointment of my life. So actually, we had, in A Better Shrewsbury, we had recommended that the town create a permanent DEI committee, but the town opted to create a temporary task force. And they've given their recommendations months ago, and we haven't really seen an update on that. And I think that kind of goes back to what Bridgette was saying. I think if we're viewing diversity as an asset instead of an obligation, these issues would be prioritized. And they need to be, because that's something that, and hopefully that comes up in our strategic plan and our plan for the town, because it really is an asset.
So the last step that I'm gonna do now is mixing in about a cup of, it's actually a mix of bittersweet chocolate chips, which are about 62% cacao, and dark chocolate cacao nibs, which are about 80% cacao. And I mix that all together. And now I'm gonna just slightly fold it into the pan. So this gives that the extra little chocolate kick that I think these brownies are famous for.
They are. It's a nice mix of bitter and sweet.
Yeah, bittersweet. Yep.
And, well, we have a few minutes to wrap up. Northborough just has developed a DEI committee that's permanent in their town. I read that somewhere. And yeah, I was disappointed how Shrewsbury is sort of dragging their tails to have a town DEI committee. And you're right, we need to have it. We need to hold them accountable for having one. It's important. Why is there such a delay? What is the delay to?
Northborough is certainly not the first one in Massachusetts. So it's, having a DEI committee is not, it's not a new idea. And it's not necessarily the solution either. It's sort of in some ways a band-aid to the larger issue, which is that our local government and our local town offices and our schools are not representative of the population of our town. But that said, I mean, this is something that people are interested in and willing to volunteer their time for. So why not?
Yeah, and I think something important to acknowledge about that is a lot of times when people hear DEI, they only think about race. But in A Better Shrewsbury, we're talking about issues as they apply to gender, as they apply to sexual orientation, as they apply to neurodiversity and other socioeconomic diversity, ability, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's an important thing to think of, that almost everyone has something that may make them unique, where DEI could be an important part of making sure that they have access and opportunity in our community. So it's not just black, white, or something like that. It's something that we want all people in Shrewsbury to have a seat at the table. I'm actually going to stick these brownies in the oven now at 350 degrees for at least 18 minutes. I like to take mine out between 18 and 20 minutes because I feel like that gives it the maximum fudginess, but if you like a harder brownie, you could leave it in probably up to 25 minutes.
I don't think anyone likes a harder brownie. Is that a thing?
I think some people do, like the like brownie brittle and stuff.
Oh, brittle. Yeah.
And then when you put ice cream on it, it tastes good.
Oh, yeah. When it comes
Bridget,
right out the oven.
Bridget exclusively puts
Haagen-Dazs vanilla bean.
Haagen-Dazs vanilla bean ice cream on her brownies. So that is the official recommended ice cream for these brownies. I prefer Ben and Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie on top of them, but that might be a little too much fudge brownie for some people. So
You can also, because these brownies aren't as sweet, you can actually drizzle a little bit of honey on them, and that actually tastes really, really good too. Because these are a less sweet brownie. So if you're not a dairy person or you don't want a non-dairy ice cream, that's another way to give it a little bit of sweetness to match the deep chocolate flavor that these brownies have.
Wow. So how did they come out?
So this is the finished product. They're right here. They're extra pudgy. I think we can both have one, right?
oh, I would love to have one. Here, I'll bring it closer to the camera. So
You
that
know, and wrapping up, because we have another minute and a half, how do we go forward from here? How can people contact you to continue this conversation?
So we have our group, A Better Shrewsbury, is currently mostly on Facebook, and you can search for it and request to join that group. We do ask that people come into that group with an open mind and a willingness to engage in conversation. We're not interested in people coming in just to insult the topics or to derail conversations, but it's an active learning space. So I think that's the best way that people can contact us. We will hopefully be setting up a website soon to kind of create maybe other platforms for people to get involved. But currently that's the best way that people can get engaged.
It's a very carefully curated space intentionally, and it's a safe space. And I know sometimes people find that annoying, but that's what makes it so easy for us to do the work that we do in such a large community, because we go out of our way to make sure that people are respectful, that they are interested in the topics, and that they're sharing. So we do a lot of surveys and polls in the group for people to like answer questions about different things that they might believe or care about. So I think that definitely is the number one way. I also write a lot about these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion on my Medium page, which is bridgettehylton.medium.com. And so if you're interested in these topics and kind of want to get a more in-depth perspective on some of the stuff that's going on in this workspace, then you can definitely reach me there as well.
This is a very good resource, actually. We use it at school in our professional development, and Bridget's coming into our classrooms. I know she's also gone to Shrewsbury High School to do some of these talks, so excellent resource.
And if you like what Sanam has to say, she's also currently running for city in Shrewsbury. So if you're an eligible voter, feel
This is
free
my
to.
number one fan.
Yeah, I am her number one fan. So just feel free to cast your vote for her at the election next month.
And Bridget is also running for town meeting precinct.
All right.
Yeah, precinct 7. Yep.
And these brownies are amazing.
Yeah, Robin, I wish I could share some brownies with you.
Another time. Well, I thank you very much, Sanam Zaer and Bridgette Hylton, for coming on my show to talk about baking for A Better Shrewsbury. Yes, and I have to say, as we close, that I've learned a lot of information from the site of the readings and the books recommended. My awareness has heightened, and I appreciate all the powerful and informative resources that are posted on race and different across the board for demographics.
No, we're so happy to have you part of the community, and we're hoping maybe we can continue doing these cooking shows to talk about different topics and bake, because again, you know, when you have friendships, when you form these connections, these conversations just come up naturally day to day. So we're hoping to give those to the community.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Robin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.